You're listening to A Seat at the Tech Table, a podcast by Sisters in Tech, hosted by Anna and Esther Kofarigi. This podcast highlights the experiences of Black women working and thriving in the tech industry. You'll learn about how they found their paths into tech, and hopefully you'll be inspired to consider whether there's a seat for you at the tech table.
Today's guest is Hannah Fisayo, a London-based account executive.
Hi, Hannah.
Hey guys, hey Sisters in Tech, how are we?
We're good. So excited to have you on today.
So excited to be here.
Okay, cool. So let's get into it. Welcome. We're really excited to have you today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and where you're from, and what you do.
Brilliant. My name is Hannah Fisayo. I'm an account executive at Snapchat, looking after beauty, luxury, and fashion clients in Europe. Before Snapchat, I was over at TikTok looking after CPG and FMCG clients. And I am 25, live in London. I'm Nigerian. As you'll definitely hear throughout the podcast, I'm also American. And although I've lived here for over 10 years now, I still haven't managed to lose my accent. So bear with me today.
So cool. Okay. Well, one of the things we're really interested in showing people is that there isn't one route into tech. So you studied political science at university, but you also, towards the end of your degree, worked on marketing and social media for Tech Will Save Us. So we'd love to know a little bit about your university experience and then how you discovered tech.
Brilliant. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. There's no one way to go into tech. And I think when I started out at university, I didn't even realize there were non-sort of science-based tech roles. So like without having studied computer science or knowing how to code. And so like you mentioned, I'm a Bachelor of the Arts student. I studied politics and I love politics so much. It's one of my sort of favorite subjects still to this day and one of my big passions. I honestly picked the subject out of a hat when I was in sixth form, just based off of some of the stuff that I was interested in. But yeah, I was really happy with that decision. I went to Durham University, so all the way up north. It seems like a lifetime ago now. And yeah, so studied that. Whilst at university, I always did sort of ran sort of internships during the summers and Easter holidays. Like you mentioned, one of the ones I did was at Tech Will Save Us. Tech Will Save Us is it's actually a toy company. So it's a toy company for sort of toddlers, maybe people under the age of 12, teaching them how to code. So they'd have these little kits like coding your own Game Boy and learning the basics of coding through sort of games and toys. I was on their marketing team, so a marketing intern. And yeah, I learned I think I sort of started out there, learned lots of key skills that helped me in my current role today during that internship. But I always found my interning such an iterative process because Tech Will Save Us and the marketing internship was actually, I think it was my the last of like the 3 or 4 internships that I did do at university. When I started out, I was very positive that I wanted to work in fashion. So that was my first internship, was like, how do I work in fashion without being a fashion designer? And my first internship was actually was on the sort of social media team as a social media intern at a fashion PR agency. And so PR was my first sort of bit of exposure into the sort of marketing advertising world. Was not a big fan of my first internship. I remember having my manager, who is definitely from Surrey, and her name was definitely Victoria, but insisted on me calling her Victoire. And I was like, no, thank you, not for me. And then my next one after that, I kind of tweaked a little bit. So I was like, okay, I don't want to work in fashion. And that can just be a hobby of mine on the side. And let me just go into PR. And so I did a separate one that was kind of focused on the bits that I did like out of that internship and kind of kept that process going and iterating. and yeah, that's how I kind of ended up with knowing that I was interested in working in marketing and advertising.
Amazing. Wow. So your first job after university was Facebook. Tell us about how you secured a job with one of the biggest tech firms straight out of university.
Yeah. So again, like I mentioned, I really had no idea until my final year at university and final year applying. I really wasn't aware of all the different types of roles in tech. And definitely not aware of all the different types of roles at Facebook. As you guys will, I'm sure lots of the listeners will probably remember that time, or you might currently be going through that time when you're in your final year of university and you're kind of just like spitting out applications, and there's so much pressure to find something. And so I was kind of going through that period where I was doing lots of applications, and yeah, the pressure was definitely on. And I had sort of two routes that I was going down because I had done lots of my internships in marketing and advertising. I was doing lots of applications that were kind of more geared towards that. But then I was also doing a lot of applications that was geared more towards my degree. So my final two sort of interviews or streams that I was going into was the Facebook interview and also one for the civil service fast stream. So the Facebook one I literally found I think I found it on LinkedIn or something. And I was like, oh, that sounds super interesting. I must have applied just like as a pipe dream, just like, you know, one of those easy applies on LinkedIn where you're like, right, just going to click that button and send it off. And did that, almost forgot that I sent off my original application, but then got invited back for round two. Then that's when I was kind of more, I was like, okay, this is actually happening. And so yeah, I was very much so applying for both of them or interviewing for both of them in tandem. And yeah, ended up getting offered the Facebook role and deciding that I'd rather kind of go down that route. But I had no sort of prior ideas of what I thought it was going to be like, and I wasn't too sure. But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up there. And the year I was applying, I think they were really, they had a lot of headcount for that specific team. So obviously it was a lot of sort of, I guess, hard work or preparation, but it really also was a little bit of luck in terms of being at the right place and right time as well.
That's super cool. And I want to kind of dig into that. I mean, some people will see it as a transition, but in some ways it's so obviously studying political science at university and kind of developing skills in that area, or just the normal skills you pick up at university. And then going into your role at Facebook, which was kind of more in the marketing side. How do you think your skills gained at university helped you in that first job?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I had to do a lot at Facebook, and something I still do a lot of in my current role, and probably each role that I've had sort of in between, is that like having a very curious mindset and an inquisitive mindset. So I'm client facing. I work with a lot of clients. And I've always worked in sort of different verticals. So I started out when I was at Facebook, I had a mixed vertical book. So I was working with clients of different backgrounds. So I had a little bit of fintech, had education clients, had CPG clients, which meant I couldn't ever be like an expert in all of those different fields at once. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I learned a lot of in my degree is, and I'm sure in a lot of degrees, is research. So like literally sitting down and like being curious and wanting to find out more. I think as a politics student, that's probably the easiest way to get through that degree without hating it, basically, is actually wanting to find out more. And I think the same went for my role at Facebook, was like sitting down with a client and doing some, I call it desk research. So before I start meeting a client, how do I research and find out the most information about them as possible? And then when I am sort of building that relationship, how I can leverage my research and also find out more from them and have that sort of mindset where I am trying to dig for information before I even get to making conclusions. So like the research bit of before I go to making recommendations or coming up with any sort of strategy for a client, it's probably 80% that research piece and 80% finding out more about them, finding out more about their industry, their field. And yeah, so I think that's probably the biggest way that my two sort of interests or how my degrees helped out my career anyways. So they're not as sort of dissimilar as they originally seem. And then I guess you'd probably have, in general, when you're in a corporate environment, there's the literal politics of working in an office in general as well, which makes them a lot more similar too.
For sure. I guess this question is just kind of more so for people who don't really know what a strategic marketing partner is. Could you just kind of tell us a bit more about the kind of work you did and what that role entailed?
So a strategic marketing partner, essentially think of it as a consultant. So I was the face of Facebook to all of my clients. I got given a book of business or a book of clients that were advertising with us and who we kind of identified as strategic partners for us. And my whole job was to kind of help their business grow on our platform. And so that entails some of what I was mentioning before. So a lot of research about them and about their field, and then using that research to come up with recommendations on how they can basically apply our best practices to scale their businesses and to scale their sort of marketing and advertising on our platforms. And so it's really client-facing role, and a lot of it is, in terms of my day-to-day, never quite like the same, but it will sort of entail meetings with my clients and walking them through, either going through what they currently have live on Facebook or Snapchat in terms of their advertising, or really delving deeper and going into how we can sort of frame an advertising strategy with them over the course of the quarter or over the course of the year, based off of what their business goals and KPIs are.
Sounds super interesting. Yeah, so we know that after Facebook, you went into TikTok. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I didn't even know if I should include all of my different sort of pit stops in my intro. I figured I was like, we might be here for a while. So I moved over to TikTok from Facebook, and at TikTok I was a brand partnerships manager. And essentially a very similar role. All of them have slightly different roles, but kind of do the same core job. How it came about was I was just looking to work with different types of clients and kind of grow or have a bit of a change in my career. I was based out in Dublin and was also looking to move back to London. I started kind of having a hunt, and then also was reached out to by an ex-Facebook colleague that was working over there at the moment, and so I thought I would give it a go. My role at TikTok was fairly similar, but I worked with very few clients. So I worked with around 3 or 4 clients, and they were in the CPG industry, like I mentioned. So working with Coca-Cola, Red Bull, Mars, and GSK. And at TikTok, the main difference was that it was a really new platform. So a lot of what my role entailed was not so much setting strategy on what their sort of 1-year advertising strategy with TikTok will look like, but it was a lot of education. So a lot of educating my key clients and just telling them, like, going back to basics. So TikTok 101, what is TikTok? How can it help your business grow? How can we feed it into your sort of current media plans, and lots of testing, seeing what works, and then trying to scale that. I worked specifically with CPG clients as well. So at Facebook, I was working with a little bit of a mix of clients, whereas at TikTok, I was working in one industry. And that also meant that my research started looking a lot different. So now I was kind of more of an expert in that industry as well, because that was the industry that I was working within. So it was less sort of gaining sort of wide knowledge or surface level knowledge about lots of different verticals, but really delving deep in my specific industry and specific industry trends, and then also seeing how TikTok can kind of help the industry overall. So yeah, that's what I was doing over at TikTok. It was very exciting time to be there. It's I'm sure, as you guys will all know, it's the sort of new app on the block. Everyone's talking about it, and that makes it fun for my role as well, because lots of I always find with my clients, everyone it's like you're at school, like when you're like 10 years old again, when you're working with clients with this sort of stuff, because everyone doesn't want to be left out. So if there's something new, everyone's like, oh, we want to find out about it, and we want to find out about it now. And all you have to say is like, oh, well, like Pepsi's doing this, and they're like, oh. so that makes it a bit fun as well. But yeah.
Just for kind of our listeners, I know what it means, but you said your focus was CPG. I'd love you to kind of just break down what that stands for and just tell our listeners a bit about that industry.
Perfect. CPG is consumer product goods. Also interchangeably use FMCG sometimes, which is fast moving FMCG, consumer goods. There we go. I think there's like an American version and a European version, but they're both the same. Essentially, it's any brands that don't sell direct to consumer. I usually use the example, anything that you'd see in your grocery store usually. So brands like Kellogg's, Coca-Cola, like I mentioned, Daz soap or different things like that. So anything that you'd be picking up and putting in your sort of basket when you're going shopping. It's a really interesting industry to work in because it doesn't sell direct to consumer. So all of the advertising is really focused on brand. So building their brand so that when you are in the grocery store, they're the top thing that you think about. You'll notice that even when Christmas time comes around, and how do you know, like, how do you kind of build that sort of brand affinity where it's like, well, I only buy this brand of cranberry sauce for the Christmas table. I only buy this toilet paper when I've got all the family coming home, and things like that. So they really want to build that, and you'll see that on all the commercials. So like the huge budgets that they'll have for these big Christmas commercials, all kind of to remind you like that these brands are, I don't know, I guess a part of your sort of rituals that you have. So whether that's your sort of Christmas or holiday feeling rituals of like, oh, it's not Christmas until you see that John Lewis commercial. It's not Christmas till you see the Coca-Cola commercial, until you see the Coca-Cola Santa Claus, for example. And so, yeah, so that makes advertising with them, it's really different to advertising with e-commerce clients where they do sell, where they have a website, and what they're tracking is like, what they're trying to do is get you to go to the website and buy something on the spot. Whereas with CPG, what they're trying to do is something that's way more long-term. So something that's really, because it's not about on the spot buying. It's about you kind of thinking something like how we call vacuum cleaners a Hoover. So like they're trying to make, or in America, they call lots of sodas a cola. It's all about kind of getting to that point where you almost forget what the item is, but you think of the brand. So yeah.
So interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I guess coming from a research background, and the link between user research and marketing is super interesting for me, and just understanding what you do in that space. I'm also really interested in people use, and you mentioned that you went from Facebook and you moved to TikTok. What informed your decision to move?
So to be honest, probably a little bit of a pros and cons list on my half. I think sometimes I love Facebook so much, and it's such a fun company to work for. It's kind of an odd first job to have, I would say, because it sets like these expectations really, really high of like what you want out of your job, what you want out of your career. I'm sure you guys would have heard of all the different sort of perks that they have. So like whether that's free food or free sort of iPhone chargers, it's such small sort of silly stuff as well. It does make it a little bit hard when you're like, okay, I want to leave now. So there's that. But I think I kind of came to a spot where I was like, okay, I feel like I'm not completely sort of satisfied in my current role. And it was really sort of solutions oriented. So like what sort of things would make me sort of feel better? What sort of things do I want to sort of get from my role that I feel like I'm not getting now? I always take a sort of similar approach to what I mentioned earlier with the with how I was testing and iterating with my internships. I think in general or in life, that's just what you have to do, right? So you can't ever make like, well, I mean, you can pivot and make complete not ridiculous, but complete like 180 turns out of what you're doing. But I think usually the way I sort of operate is by tweaking one thing at a time. And I guess optimizing. That just makes me laugh because I'm thinking of, I don't know if you guys watched You and Crazy Sherry Ann and her husband, but anyways, back on track. But yeah, so I think the same with my internship where I really enjoyed the PR element, but maybe I didn't really enjoy the fashion element. So I sort of focused on the strengths and the things that I did like and tried to find another internship that was aligned with that. I think that was a similar thing that I did with Facebook to TikTok move. I had been, out of all the verticals I was working with CBG there as well. So I had one really big CBG client, Kimberly Clark. So Kimberly Clark is the parent company of like Andrex, Kleenex, Tampax, and a couple other personal care brands. And out of all of my clients, I found it most frustrating working with them, but I found it the most challenging working with them. And I always felt way more like a sense of sort of, I don't know, I felt really accomplished after I had done something with them, as opposed to some of the other clients I was working with. And one of the main sort of things for me was like, I just felt like I wasn't, I was kind of sort of leveling out or plateauing a little bit, and I wanted to kind of have a new challenge. And so for me, I was like, okay, well, this is the client that I feel the most sort of challenged with. Maybe I should delve a little bit deeper into this vertical in general. And so that was the sort of main sort of reason for my change. I also knew that I wanted to explore brand advertising a little bit more. And also just wanted to be, I guess, at a company where it wasn't already sort of completed. So I think I remember my manager when I was interviewing, he wanted me to join TikTok, but he was also like, Facebook is like the interior decorating, but at TikTok we're still building the house. So you're coming to be a construction worker, not a decorator. So like Facebook's done, like things are built, and like what we're doing at Facebook is like the finishing touches of like, okay, well, you know what I mean? Like the smaller jobs to be done. Whereas at TikTok, it's like the advertising company is 2 years old outside of China. So it's compared to 15 or so at Facebook. So it's very new. It's growing really quickly. And even though from the sort of outside looking in, TikTok's like this huge company, all of this stuff is happening. Within TikTok, it's a startup, and it's like very, very new startup. And it's probably newer than like, I don't know, if you think of a startup, it's newer than whatever startup you're thinking of. It's in terms of the monetizing. So with that comes a lot of work and a lot of building, essentially. So like laying the foundations, there's lots of processes that aren't made yet. But yeah, that's what I was looking for, a little bit of a challenge. And that was sort of my main reason for going into that.
Yeah, I really love what you said about kind of iterating your career, because I know some people who kind of, they want change, but they feel like they have to make quite an extreme move. And I think, like you said, changing one thing at a time, or kind of trying to zone in on what is the one aspect that I need to change, is a super effective way of approaching it.
Yeah. And that doesn't have to be about like So I mentioned like about the type of clients I was working with. Some other changes might be location. So like, again, like I was saying, I wanted to move back to London. So it's like, okay, if that's my top priority at the moment, that's an easier change to make than like trying to change everything all at once. That might be your salary. That might be your top priority. It's like, this might not be my dream job, but you might have financial goals that you have in mind. Like maybe you're trying to save for a house. Maybe you just need more money. And you might not be able to get your dream job and your dream salary and the dream location and everything all at once. But especially when you're sort of, to be fair, I'm not going to put an age cap on it, but when you're in your 20s, when you're in your 30s, like, especially when you don't have any like dependents, like, you know what I mean? I think that's the time where you can make those changes. You don't have to be in your dream job right now, but you can kind of work with each change to get a little bit closer and closer.
Okay, so you're currently an account executive at Snapchat. Tell us about your current role and what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so my current role is, again, really similar to what I've been doing at TikTok and Facebook. It's kind of a merge of the two, actually, which is really interesting. So at TikTok, like I mentioned, because it was so new, it was a lot of education. And Facebook was so established and is so sort of integral to most clients or most brands' advertising or marketing strategies already. It was really more of a consulting role, so me telling you how to do what you're going to do anyways. Whereas at Snapchat is kind of it's kind of in the middle of the two. So it's not as new as TikTok. So it's not necessarily educating on like what this is at all. Like lots of people, I mean, imagine at TikTok, I'm in a room full of 40, 50, 60-year-olds and trying to say, okay, what is a TikTok? And it's very sort of basic, like outside of even the advertising. Snapchat is a similar audience to TikTok. So lots of times the people I'm talking to won't be using it, but they would kind of have a general understanding of what the actual consumer app does. But there still is like an education side in terms of what our advertising looks like and what our audiences look like and the behavior and stuff like that. But it's not new to the block. So it's been around, and a lot of the clients that I work with kind of have already had Snapchat on their media mix. So there is still sort of maybe half and half where I'm working with my sort of clients now and doing that consulting piece. So I'm consulting on what their sort of current advertising strategy with us looks like. And then the other half is also looking at new business and trying to build out my vertical within Snapchat. And a lot of that means the more educational side of things and also the more sort of selling side of things. So I'm pitching to clients and getting like winning budgets to get us on their media plan when we might not have been there originally. A lot of them have to do with the type of clients that I work with. And so, yeah, at Snap, I'm now working with mainly beauty actually at the moment. And that was a change that I wanted to make because I wanted to basically find out a little bit more about this industry and this vertical and maybe move more into this as opposed to what I was working on before. And yeah, I think at Snapchat, the sort of USP of Snapchat is their AR, so their augmented reality business, and beauty and AR is like a really interesting sort of cross point and something that I was really interested in finding out a little bit more about. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment.
That is super exciting. And I'm super excited about AR. So yeah, I'd love to dig in there a bit. I mean, obviously you work on I guess, kind of the business side of the company as opposed to the tech side. So what kind of like involvement do you have with tech? I imagine that you wouldn't say that someone doing your side of the company needs to be technical, but kind of what exposure do you get to the technical side of the business?
So my exposure, so for example, when we're talking about things like AR, I guess my exposure to it would be learning about it from the people who probably work on the product. So I work really closely with the product teams and we have a sort of AR specific product team at Snap as well. And I work with them to basically be able to explain something that's really technical to someone that has no technical background at all. So I guess I kind of act as a little bit of a conduit between the more techie side of the business and finding out about the products and the stuff that they've worked on and they've built. And so they have all the technical knowledge, and figuring out how to express and convey that in a very sort of layman sort of way, so that they'd be able to understand the sort of commercial benefits of something, as opposed to the tech side of things. So whereas our product team probably isn't ever focused on the commercial side of things that much, or what the commercial sort of elements. And by that, I mean like how our clients will be using them. And I guess the good thing there as well is that because I'm client facing, and let's say we have a new sort of product that's coming out, if I'd be the one who probably knows the most about the sort of pros and cons from a commercial aspect. So like if my client sort of is on a beta and is like, well, this isn't working because of this, and this doesn't or this is a useless product for our business to use at all, the product teams might not have really thought about that or been able to have that much access to that sort of feedback. So we also then, my involvement would also be sort of reporting back of like how our products are kind of actually used, and the sort of feedback on that element. I think a lot of the times in tech, there's like a lot of sort of freedom. So you can kind of mold your role into whatever you'd like it to be. I will put my hands up in the air and say that I'm not the most technical savvy person that you'll meet. My friends that I do a podcast with will laugh because the response to everything is, Hannah, don't you work in tech? And that'll be me like, how do I close a window that I'm not? Like, what setting should I put this mic on? And my response is always, I work in tech, not IT, but moving on. But I think if you did have a genuine interest in the more tech side of things, whether that's the product side of things or coding or anything like that, you can always find a way to like integrate it into your role, right? So like the more you know, the better, right? I know people who build their own dashboards, who code their own dashboards and things like that to basically interpret data and things like that. I know people who are like the beta queens, so who are always getting their clients on beta tests and alpha tests and this and that. And they really work even closer with the product teams. It can be what you want it to be based on your interests. So if you are sort of interested in it, but you're not so interested that you'd make it your whole career, you can still be really adjacent to it. And that just kind of depends on you and how you decide to basically own your career and own your specific role as well. So yeah, that's my sort of contact is mostly with product teams, but that can change depending on what your skills are, basically.
Cool. And I really just want to emphasize something that you said for our listeners. You spoke about being kind of a conduit between kind of business side and a more technical side. And I think that's the key role in the tech industry, is that almost like a translator role, as in there's so much technical stuff happening, but that has to be communicated to people who are not necessarily technical. So I just wanted to kind of say that is such a key part of the tech industry. And if you're good at that kind of translation, there can really be a place for you in tech. And I wanted to kind of link back to something you said even earlier, I think the thing that makes you so great at that role is your curiosity, as you mentioned earlier, because it's the curiosity that leads you to understand things that you can then go and translate to other people. So yeah, really love it.
Definitely.
Awesome.
And I always say, I think I have it on my CV even, but if you're a storyteller, like if that's the sort of translation piece. So like if you like telling stories, I love telling stories. Then that's what will make you sort of good at that role. So like being able to see something and translate that and tell the story of what's in the data, tell the story of what's in the product, to tell the story of what your client's doing back to your team, then I think that's definitely, then there's always going to be a role for you in tech.
Cool. You kind of been telling us about some of the things that you really enjoy about doing your job. But what does an average day look like? What are the things you do?
So an average day, and so for one, I really own my own calendar to a degree, to the degree when you're client facing, anyways. Um, the average day will look like I'll have a few sort of internal meetings. So lots of things like product updates, updates from some of our cross-functional partners. So our things like our measurement team or our creative team to tell us what's going on in their teams and anything that could sort of be of value to my clients. The sort of core of my most of my days will be my client meetings. So I usually have a biweekly or weekly or monthly setup with a few of my different clients, where I give them product updates to sort of go into their ad accounts and see what they have live at the moment, see how we can make that better, make it work further. If there's any troubleshooting that needs to happen, so any of the campaigns that aren't doing well, have like 30 minutes or an hour to fix that. I do a lot of pitching, so lots of pitching campaign ideas. So one, that means I have to do a lot of presentation making. And two, I will sort of set up like an hour to actually pitch to different clients. And some of that pitching will be new business, so people who aren't on Snapchat at all. And some of the pitching will be to my current clients to give them ideas for new campaigns. So for example, lots of the pitching will be around sort of seasonal moments. So coming into Q4, I'm trying to not use all of these phrases, but coming into the sort of Christmas period or Black Friday and things like that, I'll have like different ideas of campaigns you can do for Christmas or for the holiday time. And whether that will be, and that'll sort of link in like with the different products. So if we have a push for like AR campaigns, I'll be pitching like how we can use AR in our Christmas campaigns this quarter. And then a lot of it will also be reviewing how our previous campaigns have gone. So how our previous quarter has gone. So I do lots of quarterly business reviews where I look at what worked well, what didn't work well, and how we can use those learnings to inform our new campaigns that we have going live. And a lot of it is also project managing. So lots of what I do is selling campaign ideas, selling new businesses to get onboarded on Snap. And then I really use my cross-functional teams to sort of fill in lots of the gaps. So when I get them to kind of agree to something, so if I get a client to be like, okay, let's try an AR campaign for Christmas, then I'll probably be looping in our AR teams, looping in our creative team, to kind of follow up with next steps for them as well, looping in our measurement team to make sure we're measuring the success of the campaign. And then keeping everyone in the sort of same loop, whether that's their agency, their media agency that the client's working with, the various people on the client's team, and then the various people at Snap as well.
Love it. It sounds like a really kind of fun and creative and like fast-paced role. So I think it's probably really enjoyable. What would you say you like most? Like, what do you enjoy the most about your job?
What I love most about my job is definitely the people. So I think that goes for like a lot of the roles that I've had. I'm very much like a connections-based person. And so I feel like I always do my best work when I'm best supported and around people that I really enjoy working with. I think Snap's really great at that. Just having like a team that's really supportive, who's always there to sort of answer questions. A team of people who are really, really smart and each kind of have their own thing that they excel in. So I really enjoy that. But I also really enjoy, I really enjoy just, I guess, kind of following on the people theme. I enjoy talking to clients. Like I enjoy sort of having sort of facets of my day where I'm basically in someone else's world, like finding out what's like a priority for them, finding out what's going on in their industry and their business. And a lot of what I do is listening. So you can't really give recommendations without really understanding what it is that the problem is, or what it is that they're trying to achieve. And I think the sort of key part of my role is just asking questions and letting them talk and getting as much information as possible before you kind of jump into problem solving mode. And I think with that means that I kind of find out so much about my clients, and we end up building such like a great relationship. And I think that's one of my favorite parts. And especially kind of moving, because I've moved through a few different roles or a few different companies now, I can see the benefits of that so much. Like when I had a call with one of my clients that I had at Facebook, and he's been my client ever since, because every time I move, he's like, okay, Hannah, tell me what's going on at TikTok. Okay, Hannah, tell me what's going on at Snap. And he was on a call with me with my manager, and afterwards my manager was like, oh, like, are you guys like friends? I was like, well, we're not. I was like, kind of friends. and that's great. I think it makes your job so much more enjoyable, and it makes you do a better job when like I genuinely care whether their businesses do well or not. And it's one of those roles where it's mutually beneficial, right? So like the more money you're making, the more money we're making. And I'm really honest with my clients, because I'm in a revenue driving team. So lots of my personal KPIs are based off of ad spend. But you can never find a client who's going to spend more on advertising if the advertising doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And so what the sort of essence is basically finding out a strategy to kind of help them grow as a business, to help them crack the code or make it work for them. And when it works for them, it works for me. So that's what I enjoy the most.
Love it. Okay, so I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit now. So, I mean, I can hear that you have very busy days and kind of your working life is very, very full. And what do you do when you're not working? What are the other things going on?
So I alluded to it earlier. I've also got a podcast, being the classic storyteller that I am.
Yes.
So that's one of my sort of key things I do outside of work. I've got a podcast with two of my best friends from university. And we basically were they were the two other Black girls. We were the only, okay, maybe not only, but basically only other Black girls in our year, or in our year in our college. And so we kind of started the podcast, like based around that experience. And like I said, politics is one of my favorite subjects. It's what I studied at university. And our podcast is like all about that, all about politics, culture, and different sort of bits and bobs of being a Black woman in sort of various different environments. So whether that's a work environment, whether that's dating environments and stuff like that. So that takes up a lot of my time. And it's such a nice way to, I guess, kind of hold on to something that I really cared about. So something that I'm really interested in, since I don't sort of completely focus on that during my day role. Other stuff, I don't know. Hold
on a minute.
Okay. wow. They're going to be listening like, wow, did you really try and not plug us? My podcast is called Brown Sugar Pod.
Oh, yes.
You can find us on Instagram at Brown Sugar the Pod. And you can also find us anywhere you listen to podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whichever streaming platform you use.
Very good. Now you can move on.
Thank you. But yeah, outside of that, I'm a big foodie like everyone else. So love going out to restaurants, love cooking and baking. Although it's weird, I love baking, but I don't actually have a sweet tooth. So I just kind of bake randomly and give to others. And also training for a half marathon at the moment.
Wow.
Which is something I've never ran more than 5K until like 2 months ago. So that's been really fun, training for that. And it's actually next weekend. So wish me luck.
Yes.
Thank you.
I feel like there's a hidden major key there. This is a woman who bakes but gives it to others and trains for half marathons. Yes. I feel there's wisdom there.
I'm making myself sound so much more wholesome than I am. I also be breaking it down. I be on the streets too.
Too cool. Okay.
So, it's just been so interesting hearing your story of how you've navigated into tech. But what are your future plans? Like, what are your next steps? Are there any certain projects you're interested in taking up or an area you'd like to venture into? Tell us all.
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question. And when I find it out, someone told me. I don't know. I think I'm in a new role. So for me, it's kind of like I'm laying down my roots and foundations here a little bit. Mm-hmm. I'm really, like I said, I'm often kind of led by I guess by the curiosity element. So that's what led me to TikTok with wanting to find out a little bit more about brand advertising. And that's what led me to Snapchat, wanting to delve further into beauty and luxury. And for me, I definitely want to, I guess for me, my next steps are kind of, going a bit deeper into my sort of industry and, but with both beauty and luxury and how that looks online, how that looks in the digital space, how that looks in the future with the sort of rise of AR and the metaverse and everything else. And so that's a big priority for me at the moment, is just like finding out more, learning more about those industries. I guess a lot of it's taking it a day at a time, and seeing what my investigations lead to. So I always feel like when the more you're sort of learning, then the more you find out, that's when you kind of uncover your next steps.
Exciting times ahead. Cool. Well, I think we're drawing to a close. So thank you so much for speaking with us. It's been so interesting. I'm it's funny because when I hear about people's roles, I'm like, oh, it sounds like a great job.
It really does.
I mean, I only told you the positives. Let me. But thank you guys so much for having me. It's been such a fun conversation.
Oh, yeah.
And I love so much what you guys are doing. That's so, like, the whole purpose of the podcast is amazing. If I had that during my first year of university, it would have made things so much more easier. But yeah, love it so much.
Thank you. And listen, the last question is, where can people find you online? Where, if they want to follow you, find out what you're doing, where do you want to direct them?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, where I have all my sort of more career updates in terms of what campaigns I'm working on and different projects I'm working on. So that you can find me Hannah Naomi Fisayo on LinkedIn, or LinkedIn.com/Hannah Fisayo, I think. You can find me on Instagram. My personal Instagram is Naomi Fisayo. I don't do that many work updates on my personal Instagram, but you can find me there. And then, of course, for the podcast information, you can find me on @BrownSugarPod on Instagram.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hannah. And I'm sure the listeners are going to have a great time listening to this one.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today and listening to this episode of A Seat at the Tech Table. You can connect with us on our social media platforms. Just search @SistersInTech on Twitter and Instagram, and check out our website www.sistersin.tech to see what we've got going on. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, and we'll bring you the next episode soon.